So several teams blew their playoff chances Week 17, losing in epic fashion, while others still have a glimmer of hope even if they didn't have the outcome they wanted. From the blowouts on Netflix over Christmas to the overtime thrillers on Saturday and Sunday, and even the NFC North battle to help us prepare for the biggest game of the year, let's talk about the biggest takeaways from Week 17 as we get ready for the season finale right after. All right, with Week 17 now officially in the books, we've got to take a look at the updated playoff picture as well as some of these games because there were some pretty good ones that had playoff implications attached. We had 3 Saturday games, with the first one being Patriots and Chargers, and this one was never, ever close. LA took a 20-7 lead into halftime and finished it 40-7. Good God almighty. Justin Herbert was balling out, completing 26 of 38 passes for 281 yards and 3 touchdowns. Ladd McConkey was his go-to guy per usual, snagging 8 catches for nearly 100 yards and 2 scores. He now has the 3rd most receptions and receiving yards among all rookie receivers, only behind Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Nabers. And with that win, the Chargers have officially clinched a playoff spot as a wildcard team. They're currently the 6th seed with a matchup against Baltimore on the horizon, but if they beat the Raiders this week and the Steelers lose to the Bengals, and they would jump Pittsburgh for the 5 seed and instead play the Texans in round 1. The next Saturday game was Bengals Broncos, and this one had a lot riding on it and honestly was a banger. If Denver won or tied, they would clinch a playoff spot, but if Cincy won, the Bengals would still be alive, as would the Dolphins and Colts. And again, this game was wild. So let's jump ahead to about 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, where things really started to heat up. The score was tied 17 apiece with the Bengals driving, but PS2 punched the ball out from T. Higgins and Denver recovered, so they had a chance to go take the lead, but Bo Nix threw a very ugly interception and gave the ball back with 2.5 minutes to go. A 38-yard catch and run by Jamar Chase got the drive started, and Joe Burrow got in on the tush push to make it 24-17. Bengals up by a score with just 1.5 minutes remaining. Well, 2 chunk plays to Cortland Sutton got them into Bengals territory, and then Bo Nix heaved up a prayer on 4th and 1 with 8 seconds left, and Marvin Mims came down with it over 2 defenders for his 2nd touchdown of the day to send the game into overtime. Both teams had to punt on their opening drives, but the Bengals got things going on their 2nd drive, getting the ball all the way down to Denver's 15-yard line, only to miss the game-winning 33-yard field goal. Doinked it right off the upright from the same distance as an extra point. So now with under 3 minutes left to play, all Denver needed to do was run out the clock and take the tie, because that would actually have clinched them a playoff berth. Well, instead, they immediately went 3 and out for the 2nd time in a row in overtime and punted the ball right back to Cincy. And this time, they weren't leaving it up to their kicker. Joe Burrow threw a dime to T. Higgins down the left sideline for 31 yards and then went back to him the very next play in the end zone to seal the deal. 30-24, Bengals win it. This win keeps them alive for the playoffs. It's not going to be easy, though, as they need to beat the Steelers next week, plus have the Broncos lose to the Chiefs' backups, and then they need the Dolphins to lose to the Jets. Oh, and hey, remember when I said that a Bengals win would keep the Colts in the playoff hunt too? Well, it did until they soiled their joggers on live television against the New York Giants on Sunday. Anthony Richardson sat out with a back and foot injury, so it was Joe Flacco's time to shine, and he did shine somewhat, throwing for over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he threw a pick on the opening drive and another late in the fourth quarter when they needed points badly. They fell behind 21-6 at one point in the first half, and the Giants never relinquished the lead as Drew Lock had the best passing game by a Giants quarterback since the end of the 2019 season. He threw for 309 yards and 4 touchdowns. Malik Nabers went nuclear, catching 7 passes for 171 yards and 2 tutties, including this 59-yarder that gave them a 2-score lead in the fourth quarter. And when it was all said and done, the G-men walked away with the win, 45-33. Let's be honest, though, both teams fumbled this game. The Colts were officially eliminated from the playoffs following this horrible loss, and the Giants, who were previously in line for the number 1 pick, fell all the way to pick number 4 after winning. The New England Patriots now have the first pick, and if they hold on to it after this week's games, I wouldn't be surprised if we see them get a haul to trade out of that spot, similar to how Chicago did when the Panthers traded them their souls for Bryce Young a couple years ago, because after all, the Patriots already have Drake May. Anyway, while the Colts pissed their season away with their starting quarterback on the bench, the Dolphins found a way to get a win over the Browns despite theirs being out with a hip pointer. Tyler Huntley actually played solid in Tua's absence, but it was the defense that carried them in this one, holding Cleveland to just a field goal and forcing Dorian Thompson-Robinson to commit a couple turnovers. He's not a good quarterback, guys. It just is what it is over there with the Browns. So the good news is that Miami is still alive. They need to beat the Jets and have the Broncos lose to the Chiefs next week, and then they're in the playoffs. I doubt Denver loses, but again, you never know. The bad news for Miami, though, is that Tua's injury may keep him sidelined next week as well. Mike McDaniel said he had no idea if Tua would play next week or not, so we'll kind of have to wait and see what his status is later on this week. But for now, the Dolphins still have a little bit of life. Let's get back to the final Saturday game, though. I jumped ahead to talk about Dolphins and Colts since they were impacted by the Broncos' loss, but let's talk Rams and Cardinals. LA was clinging to a 13-19 lead with 2 minutes left in the game. Arizona started driving. They got all the way down to the 5-yard line and were looking for the go-ahead score, but Kyler Murray's pass deflected off of Trey McBride's helmet, and Akello Witherspoon made the diving interception to seal the game for the Rams. An insane way to get the dub, but a win is a win, and with that, the Rams officially won the NFC West and clinched a playoff spot. Seattle had a potential chance to catch them record-wise next week and could have won the division then, but a crazy series of events led to the Rams clinching a week early, which also eliminated the Seahawks. LA needed to beat Arizona plus get at least 3 wins from either the Bills, Browns, Vikings, Commanders, or 49ers, and the Bills, Vikings, and Commanders all got dubs, so the division therefore went to the Rams. Next up, speaking of Buffalo, the Bills made light work out of the New York Jets, obliterating them 40-14 with Aaron Rodgers throwing 2 picks and sitting out the entire fourth quarter. I believe he benched himself, by the way. Josh Allen had 3 total touchdowns with 2 through the air and 1 on the ground, and he became the only player in NFL history with 40 or more touchdowns in 5 straight seasons, which is pretty freaking impressive. And regardless of what happens this week for the Bills against the Patriots, they are locked into the 2 seed. The Eagles are also locked into the 2 seed over in the NFC after they beat the brakes off the Cowboys on Sunday. Jalen Hurts sat out because of the concussion he sustained the week prior, and Kenny Pickett once again filled in, and he actually had to leave the game in the third quarter with a rib injury, and maybe that rib injury was caused by this play here when he tried to throw it, changed his mind, held onto the ball, and his arm strength is so insane that he threw himself to the ground. This is a definite highlight reel play for Kenny Pickett that is going to stick with him for the rest of his career. Anyway, after the rib injury happened, Kenny Pickett had to leave. Tanner McKee, the third-string quarterback, came in to finish the game. Yet it didn't really matter who was in at quarterback because the game plan seemed pretty straightforward, and that was to feed Saquon Barkley. This man had 31 carries for 167 yards, giving him 2,005 on the season as he became just the 9th player in NFL history to rush for over 2,000 yards. He's now just 101 yards away from breaking Eric Dickerson's single-season rushing record, and yes, we all know that if he breaks it, he will have done so in one more game played, but guess what? People said the same thing when Eric Dickerson broke the record back in 1984. O.J. Simpson previously held that record. He had 2,003 yards, but did it in an insane amount of time, 14 games. But by the time Dickerson broke it, they were playing 16 games a year. So it is what it is, and the NFL is eventually probably going to an 18-game season with 2 bye weeks, so records are only going to keep getting broken from here. The question now, though, is will Saquon even play in Week 18? Philly is locked into the 2 seed no matter what, and so I'd imagine they're going to rest most of their key starters, and while I don't think Saquon plays much, if at all, next week or this upcoming weekend, it would be absolutely poetic if he did and broke the record because the Eagles play Saquon's former team again in the New York Giants. However, it's probably not worth the risk, and Saquon himself seems more focused on winning a Super Bowl than chasing records.
I didn't come here and sign here just to break a record. I want to do something special, meaning special with the team.
Next up, the Bucs got one step closer to clinching a playoff spot after they completely destroyed the Panthers 48-14 on Sunday. Baker Mayfield was on fire, throwing for over 350 yards and 5 touchdowns while only throwing 5 incompletions. Mike Evans led the team in catches and receiving yards while also snagging a couple of short touchdowns on the goal line. He's now at 915 yards on the season and needs just 85 next week to extend his streak of 1,000-yard seasons to 11 in a row, which would tie Jerry Rice's record for the most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons in NFL history. But more importantly, the Bucs can also clinch a playoff spot next week simply by beating the 5-11 New Orleans Saints. If they do, they win the NFC South regardless of if Atlanta wins next week or not. Heading into Week 17, the Bucs and Falcons were both 8-7, but the Falcons held the head-to-head tiebreaker over them. Well, after that Bucs win and this crazy game that I'm about to talk about on Sunday Night Football between the Atlanta Falcons and Washington Commanders, the Bucs took the lead in the division for now. Michael Penix was making his second career start, and after throwing a pick on their opening possession, they strung together a few scoring drives and actually took a 17-7 lead into half. The Commanders came out of halftime on fire, though, and they put together 15 and 14-play drives that both ended in touchdowns to give them a 27-17 lead. They forced another stop and hit a field goal to take a 7-point lead, but on 4th and goal from the 13-yard line, Michael Penix threw a strike, a laser to Kyle Pitts that tied the game at 24 apiece with just over a minute to play. Well, that's plenty of time for the Commanders to get into field goal range, but they went 3 and out and gave the ball right back to Atlanta. A 25-yard throw to Darnell Mooney was a great way to start the drive, and with 2 seconds left in the game, the Commanders got called for a pass interference penalty that moved the ball all the way to Washington's 38. So out came Riley Patterson to attempt the 55-yard game winner, but the kick was way short, and the game headed to overtime. The Commanders got the ball first, and they refused to be put down. They put together a 12-play drive that ended with an impressive Zach Ertz grab in the end zone to secure the win for the Commanders, 30-24. And this is really crazy here. Coming into the game, Zach Ertz was eligible for 3 different contract incentives that each paid out $250,000. He needed 5 more catches to hit 60 on the year, 62 yards to hit 600 yards, and 2 more touchdowns to hit 6 on the season. Well, through the first 60 minutes of regulation, he caught 3 passes for 56 yards and 1 touchdown. But on the final drive of overtime alone, Ertz caught 3 passes for 16 yards and that game-winning touchdown, and he hit all 3 incentives, earning $750,000 on that final drive. Not bad at all. And with the win, the Commanders officially clinched a playoff spot and are currently the 6th seed with the Packers behind them at 7. Both teams are 11-5, so all they need to do is beat Dallas next week to remain the 6th seed and play the Rams in the first round instead of the Eagles if they were to fall to 7. And since we're talking about seeding in the NFC, we've got to talk about this next game between the Vikings and Packers, because not only was it a massive game in its own right, but it set up a banger of a Sunday night game next week, really this upcoming Sunday. As for this game, though, Minnesota was in control for most of the first half and third quarter. They took a 20-3 lead after Sam Darnold threw a dime to Jordan Addison here in the end zone. They had a chance to build on their lead even further, but Sam Darnold threw a costly pick here, and Josh Jacobs punched in the touchdown to make it 20-10. Darnold and the boys bounced back, though, as Cam Akers took this screen in for 6 to once again make it a 17-point game. Green Bay never quit, though. With 6 minutes left in the game, Emmanuel Wilson took this one in to make it a 9-point game. After the Packers got the 2-point conversion, the Vikings then went 3 and out, and this is where things got a little sketchy. The Packers offense started to heat up, and they drove right down the field with Jordan Love firing this ball to Malik Heath to make it a 2-point game with a little over 2 minutes to go. So what you got to do if you're the Vikings, you got to get a couple first downs, and you can ice this game and end it all. And that is exactly what they did to maintain the 2-point victory. Aside from that one pick, Sam Darnold played out of his mind, finishing with a career-high 377 yards and 3 touchdowns. His teammates definitely appreciated that performance, and they made sure to let him know about it in the locker room afterwards. So yeah, that was a massive game to sweep the season series against their biggest rival, but next week's game is even bigger. After that win, the Vikings moved to 14-2 and will play the 14-2 Lions next week on Sunday Night Football, with the winner of that game taking not only the NFC North title, but the number 1 seed in all of the NFC. It's actually kind of wild to think that the loser of this game is going to be 14-3, yet the 5 seed in the playoff bracket, real. Speaking of the Lions, they played the Niners last night on Monday Night Football in what turned out to be a pretty entertaining game despite it not really mattering for either one of these teams. The Niners were already eliminated from the playoffs, and regardless of if the Lions won or lost this game, they have to beat the Vikings on Sunday Night Football to win the 1 seed. That didn't deter Dan Campbell from playing his starters for the entire game, though, and they looked their normal selves on offense at least. Jared Goff threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs rushed for 117 yards and a tutty. And Jamison Williams, Sam Laporta, and Amon-Ra St. Brown each had 5 catches and a touchdown. They even ran a hook and ladder play with Amon-Ra catching the short pass, flipping it back to Jamison Williams, and he took it to the freaking house. Their offense is quite simply incredible, very impressive, lots of fun, and they became the first team in NFL history to have multiple running backs and multiple wide receivers go over 1,000 yards in the same season, with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, plus Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams pulling this off. And as a Chiefs fan who is going to have no player achieve 1,000 yards seasons on the ground or in the air in back-to-back seasons, at least in the regular season, I'm just going to tip my cap to that offense and say very impressive. So sure, that side of the ball looks great heading into the final week of the season, but their defense has been very sketchy for the last few weeks now. They just gave up 34 points to the Niners last night and have now given up 30 points or more in 3 of their last 4. So in the last month of football, they are averaging over 30 points or around 30 points allowed per game. And to put that into context, the Panthers are dead last in points allowed, giving up 31 points per game. So not ideal. Not great for the Lions, mainly because they're super banged up on that side of the ball, losing key starters like Aiden Hutchinson, Aleem McNeil, and many, many others. They got some back, but regardless are still banged up and not right on that side of the ball. And that's going to be the biggest question mark for them moving forward. We know they can put up 40 or more on anybody, but can their defense get enough stops to make a deep run in the postseason and win some of these games against playoff contenders? That is what we'll have to wait and find out. Now, near the end of this game, it's worth noting that Brock Purdy suffered an elbow injury after taking a sack, and Josh Dobbs ended up coming out there and finishing out the evening. And sure, their season is already over, but there was some cause for concern there with Purdy because he tore the UCL in his throwing arm in January of 2023. Thankfully, it appears they dodged a bullet, with Kyle Shanahan reporting today that Purdy suffered a right elbow contusion with nerve inflammation, and while he will probably miss the regular season finale against the Cardinals, Shanahan didn't make it appear that there would be any long-term issues in his throwing elbow. And that's good news for Brock Purdy because he's hoping to get some form of a contract extension here sooner rather than later. If you look at his rookie contract, he's basically been playing for peanuts and definitely wants more money. And while the 49ers did lose, one standout on the evening was Ricky Pearsall. He had 8 catches for 141 yards and a touchdown, which is pretty awesome to see how his season is ending compared to how it started. He survived getting shot at the beginning of the season, spending quite a bit of time on the NFI list, and finished the season in one of the final weeks at least with a monster of a game. And now that week 17 is in the books, it's worth taking a look at a deep dive into the playoff picture, AFC, NFC, a bunch of scenarios that could play out. We're going to do that in the next video. With that being said, though, you guys got to let me know your thoughts on Week 17's games and how things shook out and how you feel like the playoff picture is shaping up, some of the key games you're going to be looking for this weekend. Let me know all that in the comments down below. And with that, I'll see y'all next time.